From the library of the New York Stock Exchange at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution of global growth for over 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now at the NYSE and at ICE's 12 exchanges and 6 clearinghouses around the world. And now welcome inside the Ice House. Here's your host, Josh King of Intercontinental Exchange.
We hear it around here every day. For an entrepreneur with a great idea that just needs an infusion of capital by tapping the public markets to go out and change the world, it's a bureaucratic tangle and an enormously expensive proposition to go public. The chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Jay Clayton, God bless him, has heard these cries and is trying to do something about it. The SEC put out a new rule last week known as the Test the Waters rule to help gauge investor interest before heading out on that long journey. In essence, the idea lets Mr. or Ms. Entrepreneur hold private talks with institutional investors to see if their company will generate enough investment well before they embark on a public roadshow where all their cards are revealed. As it stands now, only small companies with less than $1 billion in gross revenue can use this approach before they formally file IPO papers. Anyone larger has a pile of paperwork to fill out and plenty of attorney's fees to boot. Chairman Clayton thinks that more of those entrepreneurs will end up here at the NYSE and over at NASDAQ celebrating an IPO if they could avoid the onerous bureaucracy that stops them before they start. As Chairman Clayton said last week, and I quote, "Extending the Test the Waters reform to a broader range of issuers is designed to enhance their ability to conduct successful public securities offerings and lower their cost of capital, and ultimately to provide investors with more opportunities to invest in public companies." Put another way, let's cut some red tape and let folks share in the growth of the dreams of Mr. and Ms. Entrepreneur. That's good. In fact, it's just good common sense. Our guest today, Philip Howard, has spent a lifetime in pursuit of common sense fixes to government. Let's just say it's been a sometimes very frustrating pursuit. There's no greater authority on the ways the government has metastasized beyond its remit in the past 50 years, and no one with a greater passion for ways to fix it. With the general election season now beginning to get underway, the White House is up for grabs, but so are the seats in the House and Senate where you live, and also likely the mayor, town councilors, even the dog catcher, who might have enacted a few too many rules about saving Fido from the pound. You all have the power to change that with your vote. And you have a great teacher in the form of Philip Howard, author, most recently of Try Common Sense, Replacing the Failed Ideologies of Right and Left. Our conversation with Philip is right after this.
Twilio is a cloud communications platform that allows software developers to embed any kind of communications into every software application they build. We see ourselves at day one of a future of communications, which is powered by software. And so we are going to continue to build out globally more ways of communicating. The New York Stock Exchange is a critical part of our global economy. It's amazing for a company to get to be a part of that long tradition. Twilio is listed on the New York Stock Exchange.
My guest today, Philip Howard, is the author of 5 books, starting in 1995 with The Death of Common Sense, How Law is Suffocating America. He also wrote Life Without Lawyers, Liberating America from Too Much Law, which I have to mention because the title is so damn good. And most recently, Try Common Sense, Replacing the Failed Ideologies of Left and Right, which was published a few weeks ago by W.W. Norton. It might surprise you that a guy with those titles under his belt is, in fact, a highly respected corporate lawyer at Covington and Burling, and is the founder of Common Good, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization which advocates simplifying government. Welcome, sir, to the New York Stock Exchange, and welcome inside the Ice House.
Nice to be with you, Josh.
With titles like that on your CV, Life Without Lawyers, have you been blacklisted from the Bar Association annual summer picnic?
I've certainly been blacklisted from the Trial Lawyers Association.
Going back to my story about Jay Clayton, about 3,600 firms were listed on the New York Stock Exchange, Phil, at the end of 2017. That's down about half from 1997, shortly after you published The Death of Common Sense. Is the failure of government part of the cause?
Oh, definitely. The listing requirements are onerous, as you suggested, and the ongoing requirements under Sarbanes-Oxley and such. It's like a full employment program for lawyers. You've
known Jay Clayton for many years, and you've watched governments come and go. I know you work closely with various administrations. The tenure of an SEC administrator is not long. Has government beaten Jay Clayton, or does he have a few punches left in his bag before he departs?
No, I think Jay's actually doing a wonderful job. And the new rule, the new expanding the test of waters rule, I think makes a huge amount of sense. I mean, a lot of the frictions in government are there to prevent the outlier, that's sort of the worst kind of example of behavior. And no one really looks into all the good things that those preventive rules are actually not allowing people to do. So regulation, like all aspects of life, requires trade-offs. And for 50 years now, we've had this crazy approach to regulation that tries to desperately go in search of any bad thing that might happen and write a rule for it. And the result of it is that people are shackled, really, in all aspects of life, not only at the stock exchange, but in the classroom, too.
In reading your book and listening to some of your speeches, you point to a moment 50 years ago, we could talk about the series of civil rights laws that were enacted in the 1960s, new regulations coming on board, all for good purpose, but you think it began to change the way government actually functions.
Yeah, what happened, and I talk about this in Try Common Sense, is that in the 1960s we woke up to all these abuses, and they were the racism, pollution, lies about the Vietnam War, Watergate. It was this whole decade of trauma, and people felt justifiably very guilty about it. And one of the things that happened that no one paid attention to is that they actually changed the way that government worked. Some legal scholars had the bright idea that we should not only change our values, which is important to stop pollution, for example, but we should also prevent any more bad values by telling people exactly how to do things. So before then, for example, forest rangers had a little pamphlet tell them how to do their jobs. They had big jobs. They had 1 million acres they oversaw and all that kind of thing. They had a pamphlet of principles and rules and some oversight. Worked fine. Afterwards, they had like 1,000-page rule books. People were being told exactly how to do things. When the interstate highway system was created, it was a 29-page statute in 1956. And 10 years later, 21,000 miles have been built. The last transportation bill was almost 500 pages, implemented by thousands of pages of regulations. And it would take 10 years just to get a permit to fix one bridge.
I've spent the last week reading your book, Phil, listening to your speech at Duke, watching your 2010 TED Talk, which I think about 650,000 other people have done. How did common sense become your life's work?
First of all, I grew up in the South, so I grew up in little towns in eastern Kentucky, so I had I think, a somewhat clearer sense than perhaps some people do of how real communities work. And I was always interested in public policy, so when I was a teenager, I got this job as a gopher to a Nobel Prize winner, and it gave me confidence in kind of my own ideas. And so I went to law school, got out of law school, worked as a civic leader in New York. I was chair of the Municipal Arts Society. I was chair of the committee that put up the Tribute and Light Memorial for 9/11. I've had fights with Donald Trump. I negotiated with him on various projects. What I discovered in doing that was that the people I knew in government didn't seem able to make the decisions that they knew were right. And so I started looking into it. I said, why can't people why can't they use their common sense?
Is the title Try Common Sense a capitulation, an order, or a pleading?
I think the title is all of the above. It's literally accurate. We have created a system of government in this country that makes common sense illegal. And so Americans are now trained to go through the day asking themselves, can I prove what I'm about to do or say is legally correct? I mean, it's suffocating. It's one of the reasons people voted for Donald Trump. And governing isn't that hard. It's not that actually hard to run a school. It's not that hard to figure out who in your business is doing a good job and who isn't. It's not that hard to figure out if we really should give a permit for this project or not. It's not hard to do an environmental review on a project. You don't need 5,000 pages. Most projects only have 2 or 3 really important issues to them. You could do them all in 100 or 150 pages and have it take months. That's what they do in Germany and other countries. None of this stuff is that hard. But we've made it hard by trying to legislate every decision so that no one could ever disagree with any point, and it's hopeless.
Thomas Paine migrated to the British American colonies in 1774 with the help of Benjamin Franklin. He published his pamphlet Common Sense in 1776. It was said that virtually every rebel read or listened to a dramatic reading of Paine's work. Let's hear how it begins.
As a long and violent abuse of power is generally the means of calling the right of it in question, and in matters too which might never have been thought of, had not the sufferers been aggravated into the inquiry, and as the King of England hath undertaken in his own right to support the Parliament in what he calls theirs, and as the good people of this country are grievously oppressed by the combination, they have an undoubted privilege to inquire into the pretensions of both, and equally to reject the usurpation of either.
Philip Howard, when did you absorb Thomas Paine's work for the first time?
You know, it's when I started looking into why government officials couldn't make sense of daily choices. I'd been a good student in the sense of good grades and getting scholarships to good schools and such, but I was not a good student in the sense of, chained to my desk trying to learn as much as possible. So I gave myself a tutorial in the early 90s. I actually hired an intellectual historian to be my tutor. And I spent several years catching up on the stuff that I should have learned, 25 years ago and before in college.
Some have said that Paine's ideas weren't so original, but his simple, for the time, rhetoric was a means to arouse resentment of the crown. I'd say that you write in a simple, blunt, straightforward fashion and Try Common Sense in your other books. How did you hone this style, and was it for a similar effect?
Oh, definitely for a similar effect. It's incredibly important not to be elliptical when you're writing about policy. The problem with academics and many think tank writers is they want to argue everything to death on the head of a pen. Again, most of these issues are not that complicated. Take any frame. I'm really challenging the frame of reference of telling people how to do things. Well, I can explain in simple language why that's stupid. I can explain in simple language why a thick bureaucratic rule book makes people go brain dead. I mean, it literally makes people go brain dead. It's the neurological psychologists have done studies of. You make people look at a complex checklist, they actually can't access the smart part of their brain and the subconscious. It's all used up. So you can explain these things in simple terms and people will know it's true. And so what I try to do and Try Common Sense is not argue about these issues, but actually tell the truth. This system of governing that doesn't allow people to use their judgment fails for reasons that every reader of the book will know is true.
The book is not much longer than pamphlet length. It begins, oddly enough, in an apple orchard. Let's hear a homespun ad from Indian Ladder Farms.
Welcome to Indian Ladder Farms, where we've got something for everyone. We have many large fields for picking your own produce and a friendly selection of animals for you to meet. Along with the finest selection of locally handcrafted jewelry, we also carry homemade jams and honey made from our very own honeybees. And don't forget to pick up some of our famous freshly made apple cider donuts made year-round. So what are you waiting for? Come visit us at 432 Altamont Road, Route 156.
Nice family business, founded over 100 years ago. You can pick your own apples, berries, and pumpkins there, but if you want the current generation of the family to pick them for you, the government has a few rules that need to be complied with. Tell me about that.
Well, they're subject to about 5,000 rules from 17 different governmental departments. They have 13 clipboards in the office. And the rules are, they're just absurd. There's a rule that requires that the apple cart with the picked apples must be covered by a cloth on the way from the orchard to the barn where they're washed. Now, that's a journey in that case of a few minutes. Now, those apples have been growing on the tree for 5 months, exposed to bird droppings, which is what they're trying to protect against. And the government's done nothing to protect those apples from bird droppings during those 5 months. It's like the whole thing is absurd. It's like the Mr. Van Eck said, it's like there's somebody down there sitting in front of a computer dreaming up rules. Well, that's absolutely right. Well, welcome to the rule book. Go read rules in any area, and that's what you'll get a sense of. Somebody's just dreaming stuff up and then making you comply with it. And then the inspectors swoop in. There's never been a problem at Indian Ladder Farms, and there's this feature in the New York Times about it. These inspectors swoop in, checking all aspects of the operation, and they use immigrant labor during the picking season, and ask for all this paperwork. So the family has to stop picking the apples, go spend a week or two collecting all this paperwork. They give it to the government agents, and then, of course, they find basically nothing wrong. It turned out that one immigrant worker who's supposed to be picking apples spent an hour or two working at the retail stand. That was the one infraction they found. Who cares? I mean, truly, it's a whatever the right word is. It's a solution in search of a problem.
It's the same stranglehold that Thomas Paine was writing about in Common Sense from The Crown.
Oh, completely. And in fact, and I quote Tocqueville.
Tocqueville at the end. Right?
Yeah. Tocqueville wrote a book about the French Revolution, and Tocqueville argued that the main motivation for the French Revolution was the micromanagement from Paris that told people exactly how and when they could rebuild their church steeple, how and when they could harvest their crops and stuff, and it drove people nuts. Well, again, that's one of the reasons I think people voted for Donald Trump.
The action in Try Common Sense quickly shifts to Stafford, Virginia, and the story of two volunteer firefighters with quick thinking. The county fathers said they acted illegally in saving a toddler's life. Let's listen to a news clip.
Two volunteer firefighters are suspended for saving a toddler's life. Virginia firefighters Captain James Kelly and Sergeant Virgil Bloom, well, they were on a call near McDonald's when a man arrived saying his 18-month-old child, or his little girl, was having a seizure. Well, they didn't think paramedics would arrive fast enough, so they violated their normal protocol and took her to the hospital in their fire engine.
She was completely limp and flaccid. I turned around, I looked at my driver without any hesitation, and I said, "Turn her around, we're going to the hospital."
Well, that quick thinking saved the child's life. Her parents say the firefighters are heroes and should not be suspended. I'd love to talk to those guys.
So, Philip Howard, they could wait for an ambulance, or they could fire up the fire engine and get to the hospital. 4 wheels, an engine, it works. It may be a more fun ride, but the kid got saved.
That's right. And the rule they violated was that the fire engine wasn't certified for passenger transit or something. So, yes, that's right. So what? It saved the child's life. But I can tell stories on the other side of it. There, a couple of years ago, a retiree from the D.C. Parks Department had a heart attack in front of a fire station in D.C. He was with his daughter. Daughter runs over to the fireman who's standing there, and said, "I think my father's had a heart attack, and can you help?" And they're first responders. And they said, "No, the proper rule is to call 911. But he's gasping for breath. And I'm sorry, the proper rule is to call 911. So they called 911, and by the time the ambulance came, the man, it was too late, and the man died. So there's this kind of lunacy in our country that somehow law trumps life, or that government is better than mere people. It just doesn't work. And people are, going back to Thomas Paine, people are revolting, but no one, including Donald Trump, has a coherent vision about what it will take to restore the kind of human agency, the human freedom needed to make schools, business, everything, communities work again.
I mean, reading your book and listening to your talks, there's a narrative thread that connects you to the land that we live in. I want to get into that with a couple of thoughts. You talk in your TED Talk about hiking in Cody, Wyoming, with an expert guide. She hasn't worried about the grizzly bears in the preserve. She's more worried about the lawyers that made her teaching task more onerous and expensive. To get kids to a classroom, you got to get a full bus.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So at one point, she was in charge of the debating team. They needed to go to another city in Wyoming. It's not that close. And she was just going to drive them there in her car. And the rule said, no, you can't use your car to drive the, whatever it was, 3 or 4 students, so that you have to have a school bus. So, 1, it obviously costs a lot more. 2, it's not as comfortable, rumbling along. It's just really stupid to use a school bus. It's environmentally incorrect, to use a school bus to take 4 kids to some debating location 150 miles away. And then she told the story of, she had a rule that if you hand in your papers late, you get grades reduced by 10%. That was the rule in their classrooms. Somebody turned the paper late, 10%. The father threatened to sue. I mean, give me a break. And so the principal goes and says, I'm sorry, I don't want to deal with this. Can you please raise the grade again? She said, no, that's the rule in our classroom. It's not fair to all the other kids. They turn their papers in time. Actions have consequences. And back and forth, back and forth. Finally, she gave up. She was under so much pressure, and the father had hired a lawyer. I mean, it's just this kind of legal bullshit that people have to deal with when they're dealing with the public, or businesses, told they can't give job references. It's just all day long.
Did your father call out bullshit? I mean, tell me about growing up in eastern Kentucky. He was a minister. Did he light the fire in you about preaching against government excess?
No, he was not concerned about these particular issues, but he was very much a humanist. He believed he knew that humans were frail, but he also believed in human potential. And he was very much a social worker. I mean, I'd go to prison camps with him and visit people, so we visited all aspects of society. So you learned a lot in a poor community, looking at all aspects of the community. And so I learned about how much of a difference people can make. And that's another reason why big government's so bad, because it's bureaucratized care, and it no longer gives people the self-respect and dignity of having ownership of their own community. The big brother's going to take care of everything. Neighboring
Kentucky is Tennessee. You got your start with a summer job working at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. What did you do there?
Well, the first summer I stimulated nuclear blasts and recorded them on an oscilloscope. But the next 2 summers I ended up publishing papers on post-nuclear war recovery. They were basically economic papers. And as I suggested earlier, it was just a fantastic job because we would have lunch with literally the smartest people in the world. There were 2 Nobel Prize winners on the corridor. We'd sit around and have sandwiches, and we would talk about these issues. We would talk about, well, how is it actually that people get things done? Nobody gets things done by following rules. Never in the history of mankind has anybody accomplished something by following a rule. Rules are to prevent something bad from happening, but they don't make good things happen. To make something good happen, you've got to look at it, perceive the situation, mold it, persuade the people to buy the product, whatever it is. You have to figure out how to do something.
Going back into Oak Ridge's history before you got there, here's a clip from Denise Kiernan, author of The Girls of Atomic City.
But in late 1943, the headquarters of the Manhattan Project moved down to a town that would eventually be named Oak Ridge, Tennessee. This was not a town that had existed before. It was created specifically for the Manhattan Project. From the time that they began construction of the plants and the support facilities in late 1942 through mid-1945, Oak Ridge's population exploded to nearly 80,000 people, and the town was using more electricity than New York City.
Philip, in many of your talks, I've heard you advocate for moving government functions out of Washington, D.C. Was Oak Ridge a model of success by getting the scientists and engineers outside the Beltway?
I never thought of that before. It's probably subconscious. Definitely. You put people in a new environment. Companies do this all the time when they change headquarters and stuff. It allows you to remake the culture. When Dayton Hudson Corporation decided it wanted to have a discount retailer, it didn't just open up a new little branch in their office building. They created a whole new place. They were going to call it Target. And, with a new group of people off-site with new people because they wanted a new culture. The economist Paul Romer, who just won the Nobel Prize 2018, he and I worked together some, and he's written about this, about the importance when you have legacy institutions of that you can't actually repair them. You need to rebuild them. And that's a good segue into how do you fix this, because I don't think you can go into Washington, which has been mired in this, kind of bureaucratic quicksand for 50 years now. I don't think you can go there and just fix it. You certainly can't lead it. It's unleadable. That's why nobody's, every president since Jimmy Carter has promised to cut red tape, and government's gotten twice as big. Well, why is that? Well, part of it's because they haven't questioned the premise, which is telling people how to do things. It's so stupid. I mean, the Constitution's only 15 pages long. We don't have to change it all the time. People interpret it in the context, and it works pretty well. Well, that should be true of most regulatory bodies, too. Sure, you need rules. Restaurants should have grease traps. You've got to have effluent guidelines, and somewhat specific tax rules. But there are many areas where a pamphlet would be so much better than a 1,000-page rule book.
I mean, every administration, as you point out, makes this a part, or at least the presidential candidate makes this a part of their political campaign platform on the hustings. And once they get in office, some administrations are more serious about it than others. There was a moment when reinventing government actually seemed possible, at least very much in the mind of the President of the United States. I was there working for Bill Clinton in the White House in the 90s, the South Lawn of the White House. There comes Clinton, Vice President Gore, 2 forklifts of government regulations stacked behind them. Right. Let's go back to 1993.
Mr. President, if you want to know why government doesn't work, look behind you. The answer is at least partly on those forklifts. Those forklifts hold copies of budget rules, procurement rules, and the personnel code. The personnel code alone weighs in at over 1,000 pounds. That code and the regulations stacked up there no longer help government work. They hurt it. They hurt it badly. And we recommend getting rid of it. And that's one reason I'm so pleased today to give you the report of our National Performance Review. The report contains hundreds of suggestions just like that one, totaling $108 billion in savings over the next 5 years if these recommendations are enacted.
Al Gore seemed pretty serious about it. Phil Howard, what happened?
Well, I work with Al Gore on that. I wrote the introduction to his book, Common Sense Government. Well, first of all, Al Gore does have really good ideas on this, actually. He's very thoughtful as a policy person. What happened is he got sort of stuck in the swamp a little bit. I mean, they actually made a lot of reforms in the way the internal workings of government, go about things. He changed procurement rules. He cleaned up some of the personnel policies and such. But at the base of those 1,000-pound rule books are some statutes. There's a civil service statute that allows unions to engage in collective bargaining, which means that you can't fire anybody. Well, you can't actually simplify rules and give people more responsibility unless you can get rid of people when they don't do a good job. Well, that's illegal in the federal government, and that's one of the things I talk about in Try Common Sense. We have to change that.
More recently, the current president also wanted to form a SWAT team to fix government bureaucracy. Let's hear Stuart Varney tee up the issue.
President Trump has selected his son-in-law and top advisor, Jared Kushner, to lead a newly created office focused on using business ideas to fix government bureaucracy. James Freeman, still with us, glutton for punishment. All right, James, welcome back.
Thanks.
This is the White House Office of American Innovation. Great idea, but boy, is that an uphill struggle or what?
Yeah, it is a struggle. Let's hope this is something along the lines of the Grace Commission from the 1980s when Ronald Reagan came to town and wanted to try to take an axe to the bureaucracy. It is tough going, but...
Phil, you've had a hand in working with this administration and the business leaders on the effort, a hill too tall to climb. How does Trump's first term stack up in the annals of reinventing government?
You know, he's not doing anything. He was able to undo Obama executive orders because he's the power and he can issue his own executive orders. But he doesn't, his instincts are right that it's a swamp, you need to clean it out. But he doesn't actually have an operational idea. He doesn't have the idea of, if you ask him at T+1, once there's dry ground on Constitution Avenue, how are schools going to work better? How's government going to work better? Why is the environmental regulation going to be more reasonable? He doesn't have a clue. And in all those cases, the answer is actually really quite simple. You have to give people, real people in government, responsibility. You've got to give an environmental official the authority to decide how much environmental review is needed in a particular case. If nobody has that authority, then every one of these damn things is going to be thousands of pages long because everybody's covering, uncovering every pebble.
So now we come to 2020. Already a half dozen Democrats have thrown their hat in the ring. One who hasn't yet, but if you follow Kevin Sheekey on Twitter, you get the idea he will soon, is Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of the city of New York, who did a lot of good when he was in office here for 3 terms. You've written that you like Mayor Bloomberg, but his prescription for fixing Washington is a management problem. It doesn't quite cut it for you.
Yeah, I mean, Bloomberg was, I think, a really excellent mayor in most respects, and I know him and respect him a lot, and it would be great if he were president. But he has said many times that he thinks Washington's a management problem. It's not a management problem. It's a philosophy problem. You're never going to fix government or have it be commonsensical until people can take responsibility. That's a philosophy problem. If we so distrust every teacher that they don't even have the authority to maintain order in the classroom, if we so distrust every environmental official that every environmental review has to be thousands of pages long, then it's never going to work. It's not a question of trusting them to do whatever they want. It's a question of giving them enough room, just the way anybody does in their job, to succeed or fail at their responsibility.
Are you hearing any positive soundings from the current Democratic field?
Oh, no, they're going in the opposite direction. I mean, one of the problems is it's been so long since anybody did anything in Washington that the first shoe to drop was actually Obama. Change we can believe in. We got a newly freshman senator gets elected, promising to change everything. Everything about him was fresh. So he gets into office. He talks a good game. And 8 years later, 8 million Obama voters turn around and vote for Donald Trump, who was about 180 degrees the other direction, because Trump is promising to drain the swamp, and he blows away a field of perfectly respectable Republican nominees to get the nomination, and then shockingly wins the president. Now Trump is going to fail at this because he doesn't have an idea of actually how to drain the swamp. And so the needle might swing back to some lunatic on the left who's promising socialism effectively. And what's missing in the center, it is just not hard. This just isn't that hard. It is not hard to imagine a centrist candidate that believes in dealing with climate change and income stagnation and cutting red tape and more local control and fiscal responsibility. None of those things are inconsistent with each other. Cutting obsolete laws and all that kind of stuff. But no one has that stuff on their platform. It's either, yin or yang. And so what I'm trying to do with Try Common Sense is create a humanistic, radical, centrist vision of how we could take back control of government.
So let's do a quick spin on the unconventional candidates. Bill Weld may challenge President Trump in the Republican primaries. Certainly has a libertarian streak to him. Howard Schultz, sounding very much like that centrist independent that you described. Does a guy who opened up 28,000 Starbucks locations know how to cut through red tape?
Well, first of all, I love those guys. I love the fact that they're running because we need pressure from the center. I think Schultz's his goals I generally agree with. he doesn't have an idea about how to fix it. He hasn't thought through these issues any more than Bloomberg has. Bill Weld has thought through these issues. Bill is actually, I know Bill pretty well. Bill is very smart about what's wrong with government and the failure of government.
When we come back, Philip Howard and I get into his ideas of a new governing philosophy and how every American can play a part. That's right, after this.
We discover life-saving, life-transforming medicine. We are working in the field of oncology, neuroscience, rare disease, gastroenterology. So we have about 50,000 employees in the world. We are present in 80 countries. We are driven by very strong values. Our company was created in 1781 and hopefully a long future in front of us. Takeda is listed on the New York Stock Exchange.
Back now with Philip Howard, author of Try Common Sense, Replacing the Failed Ideologies of Left and Right. Before the break, Phil and I were surveying the failed efforts at reinventing government going back a quarter century. American government today, you write, Phil, is a giant, intricate edifice dedicated to the principle of correctness. What's wrong with correctness?
Life isn't correct. I mean, there are 1,000 ways to skin a cat. There are studies of teachers. What do all good teachers have in common? The answer is nothing. They capture the attention of the students in a different way. They're sensitive to them in a different way, but they are able to command their attention and to communicate what the students need to know. Life is not about correctness. It's about freedom. Is certainly not about doing things correctly. Freedom is doing things in your own way. And this drive to tell people how to do something in one correct way is like Soviet central planning exponential. I mean, it just drives people nuts when you're reading a rule book. So a doctor told me the other day, the patient record kept getting bounced by the computer, and it was so frustrating. There's nobody to talk to, and kept being bounced. And finally, you got a real person on the phone and said, why does this patient record keep getting bounced? They can't get reimbursed, et cetera. And they said, because you didn't answer the question, have you asked the patient whether she was ever a smoker? And the doctor said, well, if you'd looked at the beginning of the form, you would see that the patient is 2 years old. So you have this system that's designed to have completeness everywhere, and it would just waste a huge amount of time. You know, patient records ought to say what's important. If you actually have everything in it, then what happens is you end up bury what's important amidst all this unimportant stuff. Ears look fine, or whatever.
I'm trying to find some glimmers of hope or areas that government can work. One area that Democrats and Republicans generally agree on is that American infrastructure is in dire need of overhaul. Let's hear from New Jersey Governor Chris Christie while he was still in office about 2 years ago, touting the progress on the Bayonne Bridge.
By June 30th, the $1.6 billion Bayonne Bridge Raise the Roadway project will have progressed to the point where the world's largest, most efficient, and environmentally friendly container vessels will be able to travel beneath it to reach the East Coast's busiest port terminals in Newark and Elizabeth after passing through the recently widened Panama Canal or the Suez Canal.
Governor Christie and leaders from the Port Authority made the announcement at Port Elizabeth's MAR terminals. Port Newark Harbor is the second busiest in the nation, and raising the bridge was considered a major obstacle to accommodating larger ships coming through the bay. Governor Christie says the pressure's been on to finish this project because once complete, it'll allow 2 times the amount of cargo to be shipped in and ultimately keep this port's competitive edge.
Keeping the port's competitive edge took a while to get there, simply to raise the level of a bridge, fill 20,000 pages of environmental review.
Yeah, it was just crazy. I wrote a long story about that. The person who came up with the idea of raising the bridge, lifetime government employee named Joanne Papageorgiou, a complete hero, saved the public $3 or $4 billion by not building a new bridge or tunnel. And here was a project that had basically no environmental impact. They're using the same foundations of the bridge and just raising the roadway, 100 feet within it. So this new generation of ships could go through it. And still had to go through this 5-year process, which probably doubled the cost of the project, in order to get approval to do it. Again, it's a sign of the kind of madness. The Second Avenue Tunnel in New York, each mile cost $2.5 billion. The same machine doing a similar tunnel in Paris, France, a country not known for its efficient labor laws, cost 1/5 as much. So you think about how much money are we wasting in government where no one can use their common sense on any aspect of doing a job.
You get intrigued in a story, as I did once I heard about your book. One thing came up as I was researching our conversation. Your late father-in-law, Alexander Cushing, traveled out to what's now known as Squaw Valley, California, in the late 1940s, opened up a ski area there in 1949. 5 years later, 1955, he boldly proclaimed that Squaw would host the Winter Olympics 5 years later. The 8th Winter Games opened to Disney-esque fanfare. Let's have a listen.
Well, you could hardly have a more wintry scene for the opening of the Winter Olympics at Squaw Valley, California. The snowstorm eased up as the ceremonies began. First, the parade of the teams. The Canadian contingent looked a pretty husky lot. The Russians had sent over a very formidable team. And Great Britain. To judge by their hats, they might all be prime ministers.
I mean, Phil, when Alec Cushing was trying to figure out how to bring an Olympics to Squaw, I'm sure there weren't many environmental impact studies that needed to be convert that hill from a place with 2 chairlifts and a rope tow to a full-sized Olympic venue in the wilderness of California. We know the bureaucracy that goes into bidding and building an Olympics today. Could your father-in-law's feat have ever been repeated?
No, never in a million years. I mean, it's like the interstate highway system. He had an idea. He fooled enough people into thinking that he was serious, and then he fooled some more people into paying for it. I mean, it was really...
he got the California government to actually get behind him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was just fantastic. And again, it's what makes this country great is you can wake up in the morning and have an idea and go try it. And, as I say in the book, trial and error is like the American national motto. You have to be able to fail in order to succeed, and you have to have an environment that gets people excited and they have a sense of purpose. And it's not just building a business. It can be helping out your local school. It could be anything, but people need to be able to have ownership. The cure to alienation is ownership. And what we've done with this big brother bureaucracy is not, and that's why deregulation is the wrong idea. The right idea is not to amputate environmental laws or to amputate worker safety laws. The right idea is to have oversight that from a distance that goes and sees where things are going out of bounds and tries to fix them. But, oh my God, the whole point is to support people's freedom. Instead, in the last 50 years, more and more what's happened is government has come in and it's replaced our freedom. These tentacles come in from Washington and they wrap around people and they can't do what's needed. They can't take ownership. And so you get this kind of insecurity all day long by managers and their businesses and such, where the lawyers are everywhere.
Okay, so thinking ahead to 2020, your new governing philosophy rests on the dignity and responsibility of each person. What's needed to bring government back to terra firma? Okay,
the most important thing is to actually change the public debate about what we want. Right now, it's either more regulation, socialism, or deregulation. That's what the party. That's the wrong idea. The right idea is give back to humans responsibility, including people in government. And so you need to kind of simplify. You need to have a rehumanization of all these things. Let people take responsibility. Let's have arguments. Arguments are not bad things. They're good things, or the best way to run a school, or whether the workplace is safe or not. These are all good things, as long as you have checks and balances and courts overseeing it to make sure people don't go crazy. Give people back a sense of purpose. I mean, we're at a point, something's going to change in America. We're overdue. The last big change was the 1960s. Before that, it was the New Deal. Before that, it was the progressive era. We're overdue for a change. And right now, the things people are talking about are the wrong things. It's not socialism versus deregulation. It should be, let us have freedom again. And again, it's not that hard, but we're going to have to change the narrative. We're going to have to build a public movement that can then support centrist candidates from either party or from a new party for that matter, support centrist candidates who are not just centrist, but actually kind of radical centrist because they believe in giving back to communities and people their freedom to engage in trial and error, their freedom to initiate and to innovate.
So let's quickly tick through the list of what you create as your profile of a practical society. I'm just going to read off things that are in Try Common Sense, and you give me a thumbnail of what it means. 1, regulators police unsafe conduct, not correctness.
Yeah. Focus on avoiding error. That's what law is supposed to do. It's supposed to protect us against mistakes, not tell us how to live life.
2, government is accountable.
No one in government will be given the responsibility until they can be fired if they're abusive or abuse their discretion or something.
Number 3, public schools have similar freedoms as charter schools.
Let communities run public schools in the way they want to run them as long as they get the job done.
Number 4, doctors focus on care, not metrics and paperwork.
Oh my God.
My father, a pediatrician, would love to have this happen.
Yeah, liberate the doctors. So that requires 2 things. It requires going to a capitated system so you don't have paperwork, you don't have a piece of paper every time you prescribe an aspirin. And secondly, it requires special health courts so that they don't feel insecure that even if they do something the right way, that they could still get sued for it.
Number 5, the workplace isn't a legal minefield.
Oh my God. I mean, nothing in the workplace should be subject to law except patterns or practices of discrimination, not just a fight with one employee or harassment of some kind, sexual or other harassment. Those are the 2 things that ought to be looked out for. Right now, any time a worker doesn't work out, it could be a lawsuit. And so the result of that is completely counterproductive. You end up you're not honest with people, so they don't learn from their mistakes.
Number 6, children are allowed to run around.
Imagine that. This country, we're so scared of lawsuits and so scared of doing things inappropriately that literally parents make other parents sign waiver forms when the kids come over for a sleepover.
Social work and volunteer help is encouraged, not constrained.
Oh my God. So there's this new book out called Alienated America by Tim Carney, really good book, talks about how churches, we took away from churches and synagogues the ability to actually help their community, to have soup kitchens, or, for example, one soup kitchen closed down because the restaurant inspector couldn't inspect every kitchen where the food was made. It was like potluck, well, there'd never been a problem with that. People weren't poisoned. They were feeding people who were hungry. Let people do that. Why should government get involved in that?
Number 8, citizens in a free society should be free to judge other people, including about their moral character.
Oh my God, so important. People judging people is the currency of a free society. Do you want to work with this person? Do you trust this person? Are they working hard? Do they have good judgment? Are they good writers? Whatever it happens to be. How do you prove those things in a lawsuit? In a free society, it's like molecules bouncing around. Molecules need to find their comfortable molecules. That requires us to be able to make judgments about other people, not have to hang out with people we don't want to hang out with.
Number 9, federal government is no longer a separate inbred culture.
Oh, break it up. Washington might as well be an alien force from Mars at this point. And I recommend that all these, most agencies get moved out of Washington, distributed around the country. It would cost almost nothing. In the scheme of things, like a one-time cost of 1% of the total federal budget.
And last, number 10, Phil, eliminate the waste of legacy bureaucracies releases vast public resources for current needs.
I did an analysis of the top 10 broken programs, things everybody knows are broken. You can't, the civil service system, you can't manage people and stuff, and put cost estimates on each of those. I came up to $900 billion a year in just getting rid of programs that everybody knows are broken.
So if we don't follow a new path to a practical society, Phil, is another revolution in our future American or French? Will the heartland win?
Oh, the heartland's definitely going to win here because the Eastern elites, of which, of course, I'm a proud member at this point, although I'm from the heartland, the Eastern elites don't have a sense of, they don't have that sort of visceral sense of ownership that they're fighting for. People in the heartland, they see what's been taken away from them. They don't have the comfortable lives of summer homes and all that kind of stuff. You know, they feel it all day long, and it's their passion that's going to win here, and they need a constructive vision, not a crazy vision. And right now, both political parties are giving them crazy visions.
Your prescription, give Americans back their freedom to do things, as Frank Sinatra would say, my way.
Completely. People need to have the dignity and self-respect of doing things in their own way. I mean, it's just, every psychological study confirms that. We're not drones living life according to some prefixed, route of march. Do that, and the culture is still great. This country's culture is great. Let's unleash that energy.
If 243 years ago in 1776 we had Tom Paine's Common Sense, then in 2019 we have Phil Howard's new book. Go get a copy, pages 161 to 166, 10 Principles for a Practical Society. If there was ever a simple pamphlet for our times, this is it. Try Common Sense. Phil Howard, thanks so much for joining us inside the Ice House.
Great to be with you, Josh.
That's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Philip Howard, author most recently of Try Common Sense, Replacing the Failed Ideologies of the Right and Left. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or a question you'd like one of our experts to tackle in a future show, email us at icehouse@theice.com or tweet at us at NYSC. Our show is produced by Pete Ash and Teresa DeLuca with production assistance from Ken Abel. I'm Josh King, your host, signing off from the Library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell, a solicitation of an offer to buy any security, or a recommendation of any security or trading practice. Some portions of the preceding conversation may have been edited for the purpose of length or clarity.